Today we're going to be talking about one of the most hyped up philosophical books that you could possibly read. Everybody's talking about it. It's big in the niche philosophical community. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. That's the topic of today's video. Better strap in. It's probably going to be a long one. To start out, this is one of the weirdest books that you can read philosophically. It's a lot different from reading Plato or Aristotle, Friedrich Nietzsche, David Hume, or any other philosophers that are trying to convey their opinion to an audience. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations were private notes that this Roman emperor, that's who he is, he was born in 121 AD. He was basically a Roman emperor 2,000 years ago at the height or the golden age of the Roman Empire. And these are basically a culmination of notes that he wrote to himself philosophically that he never really planned on, I guess, forming into a concise, opinion for an audience, right? This is just a culmination, basically a 200-page book, depending on who translates it and what book version you get, of what Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself throughout his life, right? His opinions and his own experience in day-to-day life. And it's fascinating from that alone, right? Not even delving into his ideas, reading a man's words from 2,000 years ago, right? And not just a random everyday guy. This is one of the, or if not the most powerful men of this time, right? This is the Roman emperor in the year, 140 or whenever the fuck he ruled. He was also a Stoic, right? This is kind of where Stoicism started to spark up. If you don't know what Stoicism is, it's not nihilism, which is the idea that nothing matters. It's more so that you can't control the external events in your life. You have no capacity to change how things are going to affect you from the physical sense. But you have the capacity to internally change how you feel and how you perceive those events, right? Pain will always be pain. Pleasure will always be pleasure. Sad events will always be sad events. You have no capacity to change them, but you can change how you perceive them and give them a different light in your own brain, and that changes how you kind of live your entire life, because how you perceive is everything. How I'm basically going to form this video is I'm just going to be touching on things that I want to talk about that I read from the book. Some of it'll be quotes, some of it'll be, fucking summarized viewpoints that I have on things that he said. If I get shit wrong and you're a big philosophical expert, feel free to correct me in the comments. And if you have anything that I don't talk about that you find interesting or found interesting from the book, feel free to share. Let's get in. To start out, one of the non-philosophical things that he, kind of talks about in the book is takeaways that he had from individual people within his life, which really ropes you into his world, because you're reading the literal it makes you fully realize you're reading the private journal of a man that lived 2,000 years ago, right? He starts talking about his mom and his friends, and he's calling them by name, and you have no idea who the fuck they are. They're just random people. The translators try to describe them to you in some way of like any info they had, but a lot of the people that he mentions, there's just no info on, right? They're just like random people or servants of his or slaves, which is also, a part of the book that slavery existed, and was pretty active. You realize, like, this is the Roman emperor in this time. And so he has some bad takes on that, but you kind of got to, I don't want to say you got to look past that, but you're going to see that a lot in like older writing, older philosophy as well. Like Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about like how people perceive each other and utilities of friendship. And he has like a lot of really bad takes about women. And you gotta disregard that shit. Not in the sense that you ignore it, but you gotta go, this was fucking stupid. He was an idiot for saying this, even in his time. But that doesn't discount all of the other stuff that he said. That does make sense if you just kind of pull that sexism aside, right? Or pull the fact that Marcus Aurelius understands and also somewhat not necessarily advocates for slavery, but he talks about slaves in a semi-demeaning manner. He basically it says, this is where Stoicism starts. He basically says that everybody has a role, right? And that you have no control over your role that you've been given in your life, but you can control how you perceive that role, and that makes your life a hell of a lot better, which is true, right? But to tell a slave that, hey, you're born a slave, you're meant to be a slave, just fucking get over it. It's a lot harder to swallow that than saying like, hey, you were born into an impoverished area, you have to be okay with that and try and move forward with that in that sense. Like, you can twist those words in a way where it's like, you could take that to modern times with what he's saying and just remove the whole, slave part of that. I mentioned earlier how he talks about the eternal soul, and I didn't want to really talk about that because I didn't matter. He mentioned it's the word command center, at least in the translation that I read. He uses the term command center to talk about your soul. And I'm sorry, those bits were a fucking drag for me to read because he starts getting into like really, he kind of, I don't want to say he contradicts himself, but he does at certain points. At least that's what it feels like. Obviously, these are private notes and his own thoughts, so it's not absurd for him to contradict and say things that don't match up. But he says very like stoic, not atheist-esque things, but he's like very spiritual, but also like at times death is inevitable. Life doesn't really matter whether or not you live or die right now. Get over it. And it seems like those things can match, but a lot of the time don't, at least in modern times. So when he talks about it, it feels really weird to read him kind of have polar opposite takes, I guess. One of the cool things that he says that you read early on is that virtue is knowledge and vice is ignorance. And virtue is basically good and vice is bad, if you didn't know. But that's usually what most earlier philosophers use, is virtue and vice instead of good and evil. And he basically attunes it to the lack of knowledge that something is bad, because most bad things or vices that you commit in your life, you don't realize are vice or you think are good. Like smoking a cigarette is ignorance, right? You are perceiving that as good because you're obtaining pleasure from that, but you have the lack of knowledge or wherewithal that like, hey, this is probably going to result in my death at a younger age. This is bad for me. Not in a vice in the sense of like a moral vice, like you're hurting other people, but in the sense that you have that barrier in your mind that you can't get past because you perceive this action as good. He also says that worrying about death is trivial because everything in life, in your life and everybody else's life, is cyclical, right? You're born, you grow, you live, you die. And whether you live 100 years, 1,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, every single person that dies loses the exact same amount, and that is the present. Because the only thing that you can lose in death is the present, right? Yes, you can look at the future and be like, well, I won't experience that. But the only thing that you are physically losing is the present, because the only thing that actually exists is the present. The past doesn't exist and the future has yet to be in existence. Stoics also have a very weird take. Marcus Aurelius talks about the idea of suicide. And they don't support it in the sense of if you're going through depression. They perceive it more as if you're in old age and you have like Alzheimer's, or you're losing your body and your mind and you're becoming something that you haven't been your entire 60, years of your life, that it is not frowned upon in their mind to do that because you are preventing yourself from becoming something that you're not and losing yourself in the mental and spiritual sense before you actually physically die. And I don't really know how I feel about that. I feel like that's one of the weirdest parts of Meditations that I kind of reread because he talks about it a few times. And it's kind of, it's a take that you don't really hear in modern times at all, but it's something that's actively spoken about in, I guess, modern politics as well, right? In other countries, like the idea, like in a lot of Nordic countries, like they have assisted suicide chambers, right? For people that are going through terminal illness, right? If they have stage 4 cancer and they're 80 years old and they have 3 months to live, but those last 3 months are going to be really bad, is it up to them to, take their life before they lose themselves? And I don't really know how I don't really have an opinion. I don't want to say I'm trying to fence it here, but it's like, I feel like that's a very circumstantial situation. And it's also really hard to put yourself in those shoes until you're actually in them. You know what I mean? Little quote here, around the same time he says, "It is better to be your own master and look on the world as a man, a human being, and a citizen, a creature doomed to die." I think he's basically saying that it's better to be the, captain at the helm of the boat than somebody that's just watching it float by, right? And that kind of ties into what I was saying previously. And this is a really rare take you'll see from a very famous ruler that is egoed to the max. He basically says that post-death fame is fucking stupid. because everyone that knows you will also die. So worrying about having some crazy legacy that has you remembered is stupid versus just kind of giving something that will put the world in a better place for when you leave than when you came, right? You should worry less about being remembered than doing something that helps people that won't remember you, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to be forgotten. You cannot change that. Now, he says this, and this is where I get to the part where I feel like he contradicts himself, because he talks about the gods in the command center at certain points, but he also says that we are made of cause and matter, and when we die, we undergo change, and you're assigned to some part of the universe, and then that change will change again for an infinite amount of time, basically saying that your matter is going to be destroyed, recreated, and transformed, or not destroyed, right? Because matter cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. That every part of you will continue to exist in the universe, just in a spread fashion, being reformed and recreated, kind of like clay that's being kind of, made into a vase and then crumpled down and made into something else. You will kind of flux in the universe, consciously or non-consciously, forever. And it's really weird that he's having this like almost scientific take prior to them knowing any of that. And Marcus Aurelius knows and knew at the time that many rulers become egoed, right? They become narcissistic and power hungry. And he constantly tells himself, quote, beware of becoming carcerified dyed in purple. And he's basically saying that he shouldn't become a dictator and be attached to his role so heavily that he removes himself from like the common people and humanity in general, right? You have to remain one with the people rather than one above, if that makes sense. I don't think this is a quote, but I wrote as a note of what he was saying. Feelings are caused by opinions. Remove the opinion and no feeling follows. Observe, but don't side. And that goes to the Stoic idea that you can't control a lot of the things in your life. A lot of the bad feelings you have for things are based on opinions. Those opinions you have give root to feelings. And you can't go through life without having an opinion, but you should go through life being more observant than opinionated. And this is coming from somebody that's very opinionated. But I also try to take a step back a lot of the time when people do disagree with me and not get angry about it, in the sense that like I really enjoy talking about philosophy, religion, and politics, even if you don't agree with me, because I want to know why you think the way you think, your experience in your life, and being more observant in that sense, because that enables people to be closer together, come at more common grounds with one another, and push society in a better direction rather than separate, obviously. One of the coolest things he says is stand straight, not straightened. You will learn moral principles yourself and live them yourself rather than have others put them onto you. You grow up in your life kind of living with your parents, inputting a lot of information to you and kind of sharing their own values. Whether they're consciously doing it or not, some parents do it more than others and tell you to live freely, or really you kind of ingrain their own philosophy, religious ideology, and political ideologies onto you. You have to not get mad at them for that, but realize that you need to stand straight, not be straightened. Don't let other people form you, form yourself. It's not abnormal to feel bad for people who made mistakes, as it is in human nature to see people's mistakes largely made from ignorance. As long as they have not damaged your command center, your soul, and your being, they have not damaged you. So if people fuck up and they wrong you or other people, as long as they have truly not like fucked with your soul and your being and hurt you on a truly deep level, then they haven't really wronged you in a unforgivable sense. In that people fuck up all the time. You're going to fuck up. I'm going to fuck up. Everybody fucks up. But there's a time and a place to hold resentment and a time and a place to try and teach and forgive. And that's really dependent on what's happening. But I think that holds true to a lot of instances where people hold resentment for others for things that they shouldn't. He also talks about how if somebody wrongs you, you should not initially judge them for who they are. Rather, judge and perceive their concept of good and bad and how they perceive their actions that they've done. Do they realize and do they know that they're doing something bad in the extent that you do? When people make mistakes and fuck up, a lot of the time, they don't really sit there in the same mindset as you and go, this is really wrong, what I've done. They don't know, right? And it's crazy to say that, but a lot of people grow up in different instances, different, I guess, experiences than you. And if they've wronged you, do they actually know that they have? And if they do know they have, do they know they have to the extent that you would perceive it? If that answer is yes, then they've truly done something bad that they need to, I guess, fix. But if they haven't, it's not that they're forgiven, but they should rather be taught and reformed than punished, is how I perceive what he's saying. Imagine you have been dead and never lived life to the present moment. What remains is a bonus. Live in accord with nature. Oh, fucking peak. Saying that like, yeah, you're afraid of death. This is something that sucks, right, to deal with. But what if you never lived? Now just perceive your life as if you never lived and you just spawned into creation. Now you're living like a little extra before you go again, right? Because you could theoretically have never existed. You could have never been watching this video, never been born, never had life in any way whatsoever. It is possible for somebody to be the best man who ever lived, yet not be recognized by anybody. It takes very little to live an honorable and fulfilling life. Honor and fame does not equate to goodness in that sense, right? The best person that's ever lived, you've probably never heard of, right? It's probably some guy that just lives in a small community, some person that lives in a small community that just, shared kindness every day through and through. And they've never been recognized for it. Recognition doesn't equate to goodness. Recognition just equates to time and a place, and fame resulting in a culmination of, good coincidences rather than actually being. And I'm not saying that like, oh, famous good people in life were terrible people. No, I'm saying that while they were good, they might not have been the best person that's ever lived or the most moral or holy or spiritual or saint-like person that's ever lived. They've just never been recognized because they never had the chance to be. When you have done a good deed and somebody else has benefited, it is foolish for you to look for a third gain above the first. You did something good and somebody else got something good in return. Why should you expect recognition for doing something good or expect return from doing good? This kind of goes into like the Ayn Rand mindset that nobody can do anything moral because every action that you ever do is for a selfish purpose. Because opening a door for somebody while it is good, you may expect something in return, right? Giving somebody a favor at work may be good, but you might be looking for a raise, right? You should just do good to do good, right? And the pleasure you obtain from helping somebody is all you should need to receive. And that's, I think, if there's any takeaway on living life, I think that's fucking it, man. Do good to do good. Don't do good to get other shit out of it. Right? Because I think the other shit will come, but you shouldn't expect it, if that makes sense. Also, I'm sorry I keep saying, if that makes sense. This is like the 30th clip of this video. Keep in mind, a lot of the things I'm saying too are like paraphrasing or like summarizing. Not every single thing is a quote, but some of them are. He also says, to be afraid of death is to be afraid of either unconsciousness or a different kind of consciousness. Death is the end of consciousness or a different kind of consciousness which forms you to become a different creature. In either case, there's nothing to be afraid of because you will not exist in a different light, right? You will become something else that you are currently not, and you will not be conscious in the way that you are now, or you'll just die altogether, right? And there is no you that can be upset about that. Yes, you could be upset in the present tense of you not existing in the future, but being dead isn't something that's sad. It's nothing, right? Even if you get changed to something else, you won't exist in the way that you do now. He also says that every change is death. Becoming an adult, losing your childhood is a death of a previous self. The changing may have been worrisome, but not fearful. In the same way, he says to not fear death, right? I've talked about this on stream a few times in that the only person that is ever going to have to experience death is the individual that you are in the exact moment of your death. If nobody has no clue, nobody has any idea how long they're going to live. Say I live to 75. I'm not going to have to experience death. Joe Bartolozzi at 23. Because I'm going to be dead, right? I'm already going to be dead a year from now. When that death occurs, I don't really know. I think it's changes in life experience and also, time, right? It's not just time, it's time mixed with experience, because you could be the same person for like 3 years effectively, or you could be a different person within a month, right? Because a lot of experiences and things can change you and how you perceive life. And each of those is a death. And so if you're laying on your deathbed when you're 75, 23-year-old you isn't dying, 23-year-old me isn't dying, 15-year-old you isn't dying. That person's already been dead. That person's been dead for 5 decades at that point, 6 decades at that point. It's not you that's experiencing it. That person's already in the past. The only you that can die is the present you, and the only thing that you can lose is the present, not the past, not the future, only the present. Okay, I wrote this note to myself, and I feel like this shit's crazy that Marcus Aurelius said this in like the year 150. The cycles of the universe have every single thing relating back to an impulse making it occur, or the universe as a whole had a single initial impulse and everything else follows by consequence. I mean, is he not describing he's basically saying everything's either always existed, right? The cycle of the universe have every single thing relating back to an impulse making it occur. Okay, that might be God. Or the universe as a whole had a single initial impulse and everything else follows by consequence. And so he's basically saying there's an impulse with control between everything, or he's saying that something occurred and everything else just happened by circumstance. I mean, that's describing the exact situation that humans are in today, where it's either like, hey, God created the universe and everything after it occurred with a plan, or it's just the universe was created. How did he know of the alternative prior to? Maybe because I guess it's hard for me to put myself in that mindset because I've always known of the Big Bang, right? Since you're able to contemplate the universe, you know about God when you're a kid if your family's religious, but you don't really contemplate God in that sense, right? If you're 5 years old and you're a Christian, I don't want to say you don't believe in God, but you don't understand spirituality, right? Your brain isn't conscious enough to truly understand life, death, the gravity of the universe that you live in and who you are as a person and conscious being. You don't get that. By the time you do get that, you've heard of the Big Bang. So it's like I can't put myself in those shoes to even understand if I would ever try to, I guess, theorize of another way the universe or things would have been created. I guess by seeing other things circumstantially or consequentially happen in the current Earth in his mindset, and then just going, hey, that's probably how it started and how everything else occurred. Fucking crazy to me. At one point, he takes like an outward look on life and says, and I quote, "Think also of the lives lived by others in the past, the lives that will be lived after you." And that's not that crazy to say, but it's weird that I'm reading these words from a man that wrote this to himself, having no idea who I am or who anybody else is that is reading his book thousands of years in the future. Like, that is, it's just a cool feeling. Like, I'm never going to speak to this man. Nobody even knows. The only thing, editor, fucking pop up a picture of Marcus fucking Aurelius. It's, if you didn't do it at the start, too. What the fuck? We don't even have a fucking painting of this guy, let alone a picture. It's a fucking stone sculpture. That's how long ago this fucking guy lived. It's like he just looks like a fucking Sims character. We have no idea. Is that actually how he looked? Not that it matters, but it's like, you can't even get a grasp on this is just a guy that lived, right? That fucking ruled Rome. What? He also says you are made of a combination of components within the universe, and so it is a part of nature that you die, as those components must be rearranged and reused for the next beings to be created. I mean, that really just feels like that feels like reincarnation almost, like a take on that. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I like reading this. It took me forever to fucking read this book. It's a lot easier to read other philosophy where they're planning it for a reader because it's like point A, point B, point C. It's just all over the fucking place. And the people that, edit and translate these books kind of try to piece them together where it's like, hey, this is a section about this and this and this. But it's literally just like random. Like, have you ever written a note to yourself in your fucking like notes tab or wrote something down that you thought was like meaningful? It's just like, hey, we're just going to throw all those into a fucking book and call it a day. Like, he's having all of these thoughts, and a lot of them do combine. And I think they kind of centrally focus around Stoicism. And that's why he's like cited as one of the main, like when you think of Stoicism, you think of Marcus Aurelius, usually. And that's because a lot of what he says focuses around death and how you either shouldn't be afraid of it or that, hey, it's a part of it. And you shouldn't really worry about a lot of the things in your life that occur to you. You should just worry about how you perceive them. And that's like a big focus of Marcus Aurelius. He talks about how when you have like beef or anger with somebody, removing yourself from them and them from you is bad, because when you sever yourself from another, you remove both yourself from and them from the community as the whole, right? So you're kind of detaching yourself from the group. He also says you can share a trunk with them without sharing their principles. Even if you live on the same tree, you don't have to sever that branch. You could still share the same trunk, but stay separate from one another in, I guess, like an acquaintance-esque manner. He also says anger is just as much a sign of weakness as suffering is, because both an angry man and a man in pain have surrendered to a wound they've incurred. That's my favorite quote from the entire book, because I feel like I know I crash out a lot on social media and I crash out a lot on stream. And a lot of that is, you know, me kind of like upping that when I'm not actually mad, but I do get mad a lot. And I have had that issue from being a kid, right? How I hold my own emotions together in instances of stress, right? I feel like for me, anger doesn't come from being wronged and getting angry. I get angry when I get overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed, and overwhelmed turns to stress. Stress turns to anger. And that's a weakness, right? That's like, that's not just me, you know, being an angry guy. Like, I'm failing in that sense when I'm getting angry. I think it's different on stream because it's like entertaining in that sense, but I'm just talking about in life. Like if you have road rage, or if you have something that upsets you and you get really fucking angry about it, right? Being overwhelmed is normal. Being stressed is normal, but letting that turn to deep anger, right? Or deep sadness is like you're incurring a wound and you're faulting to it, right? You're kneeling to it. You're not pushing forward, you're failing. And it's okay to fail, but like recognize that like, hey, this isn't just natural. It is natural, but it's like, it's something that is preventable. He also says people know they should love themselves more than others, but also attach less importance to their own opinion than others of them. People care so much about how people perceive them rather than how they perceive themselves, even though they recognize that they should care about themselves. And on top of that, he says nobody's useless. They just lack practice. The left hand, quote, is useless for most things because of lack of practice, but it grips a horse's reins more firmly than the right hand because it had plenty of practice. Now, that makes no fucking sense if you don't ride horses, but it's basically saying that in instances where you use your left hand frequently, your left hand isn't useless. It's only useless in activities where you currently use your right hand because that is what's getting the most practice. You as an individual are not useless regardless of who you are and what you've been through. You just have lack of practice and lack of experience in certain instances of life that you need to have experience in. So never knock yourself in that sense. You just need to practice more. And also, we got a few more things, but I'm sorry this is a long video that's all over the place, but that's kind of how this book is also formatted, and it's also just the random takeaways that I have. He also says, I feel like these last four that I'm talking about are really interesting. Either instruct them or put up with them. He basically talks about how bad people do bad things because they have a bad disposition, right? They have a bad starting trunk of how they perceive life, how they perceive things. So it's in their nature that logic to do bad things comes from their bad disposition. So you either have to change that disposition and change their outlook on these things to change how they act, or just fucking deal with it, because that's the only thing that you could do. The issue is changing somebody's disposition, and this is where I'm going to disagree. I think he kind of simplifies it. Changing somebody's disposition is damn near fucking impossible. Because when you debate about things, you learn about the other individual, but emotions are involved. And people hold their own disposition, their own beliefs, their own practices near and dear to themselves. And if you challenge that, you're challenging somebody's consciousness. You're challenging their being. You're challenging, as he would say, their command center. And so if I'm talking to you about something that you have a polar opposite opinion about me, and we both are talking about this, about something that is really near and dear to us, I can't just change how you think, right? And so I think he would say, then just fucking get over it, right? And you get over the fact that I don't fucking think the same way as you, which is kind of sometimes it's a neither here nor there. Disagree, agree to disagree, right? That's going to be life in a lot of instances. And I think a lot of people put agree to disagree in areas that shouldn't be said in that sense, right? Because you can't say agree to disagree about things that are really meaningful in like a political or sociological sense, where it's like, hey, this is how we're going to run the country. We can't agree to disagree. We have to come up with a middle ground. And I think that goes back to you can live on the same trunk, right? You can't sever that branch off with somebody else. You have to sometimes agree to disagree and come up with a middle ground that makes sense for both people. The last thing that I wrote, how I kind of want to end this video, remember that in a short while, you won't exist at all. This is a quote, by the way. And the same goes for everything that you now see and all the people now alive. It's a fact of nature that everything changes, deteriorates, and perishes so that the next generation of things can come into existence. I hope you very much appreciated this video. We're going to do more of these as I finish other philosophical books, while they will be, kind of spaced out fairly frequently because I read very slowly, and I gain motivation to read long philosophy books periodically. We'll continue to do these. I hope you guys enjoyed my random ramblings about Marcus Aurelius, and I will catch you in the next one.